Every week I hear a version of this conversation from a parent. I feel like we've done so much and have tried every option for our child, but they're still stuck and they're still struggling. This is heartbreaking to hear, but it's felt by countless parents today. You've been to numerous doctors, you've explored various medications, different therapies, and maybe you've even dove deep into holistic approaches and functional medicine, yet your child continues to struggle with the same health challenges. Despite all the advances in modern medicine, this explosion of alternative therapies we have today, children's health in the US has significantly gone downhill over the last 15 and 25 years. We've seen an unprecedented level of chronic illness, behavioral challenges, and developmental delays, which tells us that we're still missing the underlying root cause of the fundamental decline in our nation's health. Well, what if I told you that the key to finally breaking through this exhausting cycle is not found in doing more, but it's actually in doing less? What if the missing piece isn't another supplement, another therapy, another intervention, but instead lies in addressing the one foundational system that controls everything else in your child's body? It's their nervous system. That is what I want to talk about here today, and unfortunately that is the status that so many of the families we meet here at Thrive, is they are doing so much but still struggling, and it's usually because they're built on a foundation that's not stable. Let me walk you through this hierarchy of healing that I have here, and forgive me, you have to deal with my handwriting ability, so I will do my best to explain if it is unable to be read. But this really explains what is going on with our kids and why you can be doing so many good things that we're not opposed to, but maybe done in the wrong order that isn't allowing your kid to reach their full potential. So what happens when you typically encounter a health struggle or a health challenge with your kid? You may be turning to Dr. Google, you're turning to your traditional pediatrician, and you typically land here on this second notch of our hierarchy of healing, off this pyramid. That's the motor and the tone systems, right? Maybe the therapy is PT, OT, speech therapy. Something is addressing the motor and the tone systems. Those are helpful, those are good, we're not opposed to them, right? There's times they are needed and they can make progress. And in fact, usually kids do well, at least to a certain extent with those. They make some progress before plateauing and not really getting to where they need to be. Or maybe just because it's your nature as a parent, or after that has tried and failed, you go to the next step, which is typically that gut and that immune side of it, right? That is functional medicine. That is the integrative healthcare. You're doing detoxes, you're doing supplements, you're doing blood work, you're diving into that. We love it. We do it ourselves. We have amazing community partners that we recommend for that, but it still can be missing. And then the top tier here, that's more brain-based interventions, counseling, ABA, sticker charts, right? You're just trying to address the behavior directly. And parents can't help but laugh if they've got a super dysregulated, maybe on the spectrum, high sensory needs, high energy kiddo, because that stuff, that brain-based therapy is essentially impossible when you've got a kid in that place, right? Your kid on the spectrum isn't really going to care about their sticker chart or their, let's take a deep breath before we react, because they are so wound up. Their nervous system is going from 0 to 100 so quickly, there is no wiggle room for an ABA-esque intervention. We love those things, but we've got to start differently. So what can happen to allow this to work better? It's if that foundation is right. The foundation here, the autonomic nervous system or the central nervous system, that is at the root of every single other aspect of our health. Your nervous system perceives the environment, it takes in all the information, then it coordinates the behaviors of all other cells. It touches every aspect of our nervous system. It's what regulates motor and tone, right? It's what tells muscles to move. It controls the baby that's super stiff and arch and tense, or the kiddo that's walking on their toes, or the newborn that's holding their head up too early, or the bouncing off the walls uncoordinated kiddo later on in life. It is all neuro and basis. And even some of the speech things, right? That is incredibly complex. We have to have a really high driving, high firing neurology to coordinate all the different steps involved in speech production. That is absolutely true of the gut and the immune system. You can be putting a whole bunch of really expensive supplements into your body, but when your neurology is stuck in fight or flight, you're not really going to get anything out of it, right? I think that phrase, you are what you eat, would be more accurate to put you are what you absorb. You can't make anything out of it, you can't do anything with it if you can't process it and get it into your actual bloodstream. So we can't go to there until you address that foundation as well. And then finally, that last piece of it, right? We already talked about that. You're not going to make progress until you have the ability to have that gap between stimulus and response, to take a breath, to respond, to think and process. So what does this look like if we address it differently, right? If we get a kid out of fight or flight and survival, if we get them in a more regulated state, Well, it's very possible they might need some PT or OT or speech or other sorts of therapies and modalities. So it's very possible that we got to get them off of the Cheetos and Mountain Dew diet and into a little bit of a cleaner setup. Maybe we need to heal the gut because they were overloaded with antibiotics early in life and they were hit with a million other toxins, that they are at a rough place and we need to support them because of whatever was a part of their case history. And yes, there is 1000% a role for intentional parenting and for us as those regulating forces to make sure that we are not creating more of a problem, but we are a part of the solution. And that is where brain-based interventions can help too. But this is the foundation. So how does that go off? How does that get derailed? And how do you know if that's where your kid's at, right? How do you know if that's the struggle? It often starts early in life. We see over and over again what we refer to as the perfect storm. This combination of early life stresses leads the kids who are stuck in survival mode. What that often looks like is maybe it's prenatal or maternal stress, right? Maybe you've got a mom who had some extra challenges conceiving and getting pregnant. Maybe they had some extra stress during their pregnancy. And then that often can lead to and be connected to the birth process that goes awry. C-section deliveries, forceps, vacuum, any sort of hands-on manual interventions in that birth process massively increases the trauma and the injury done to that kid. Even the most amazing of births is a big deal, right? If you've had a baby, if you've been around birth, you know how intense that experience is, but that is immensely more so the case when we have extra intervention, right? That pulling, turning, twisting at that fragile head and neck of a newborn has a massive long-term impact on them. So we see it start early on, and then when you add to that, maybe early antibiotic exposure, early exposure to other environmental toxins and negative stresses, it takes the system that's already in fight or flight and adds more load to it, adds more demands on it, and they get tanked, they shut down. Symptomatically, where do you feel that? It could be sleep early on, right? Baby life is pretty simple with eating, sleeping, pooping. So that being off, right? Constipation, reflux, latching struggles, fussiness, unable to regulate, unable to sleep as a newborn all the way through the lifespan, right? Those things don't just apply to babies, but can also show up as maybe immune system dysregulation, kids that get sick all the time, kids that have allergies or sensitivities to way more than they should. Those are all things that tell us we've got that dysregulated neurology at the foundation. As we get older, that maybe shows up as sensory processing challenges, focus or high energy, ADHD types of things, emotional dysregulation, anxiety, all of that we see rooted in this foundational imbalance. So that's the story here, parents, is when your kid is stuck in survival mode, this can't work, right? You can't build on a weak foundation. And I love this architecture analogy, right? Because the brain really needs that good foundation of good neuroarchitecture to establish everything else. I'm not really a mechanical, chemical, what would it be, civil engineer, I think is the word I'm looking for. I'm not that person, but let's think through a hypothetical situation. If you were establishing the layouts, the logistics, the infrastructure, right? The water, the sewage, the electricity, for a city that needed to have a population of 50,000 people, you would have certain parameters, right? You would have certain street widths, you'd have certain, I don't know, plants to handle this stuff. Maybe should have fleshed this analogy out a little bit more first. If that was the case for the 50,000 person city, now what if all of a sudden, over a couple of years, that city goes to a population of 5 million? Your foundation, your structure, your infrastructure, the architecture that worked for the 50,000 person city is not going to be adequate, right? You are going to have major traffic issues, you're going to have major power supply issues, major sewage stuff, and you're going to have to completely redo the model of it, right? You're going to have to completely address it. The foundation that you could use to build a 2-story building isn't the same thing you could use to build a 20-story building. That's what happens. When we have the early architecture of neurology shifted and stuck, all the more demanding higher level cognitive things that come along, right? When your kid gets a little bit older and their life isn't just eating, sleeping, pooping anymore, all of a sudden that shows up as a pain point, and now it's where the struggle comes, right? Now is when you have the notes home from teachers and you have the conversations of, why can't you just sit still? Why can't you just calm down? Why are you so stressed or anxious about this? It's probably been going on for a while, which means we need to get back to that starting point of it. Even if there are symptoms in the motor and the tone and the gut and the immune processes higher up that need addressed, if you don't start here, you're not going to be able to make progress. So when your body's not in healing mode, you can't work on anything else other than getting it out of survival. There's a great quote from Dr. Bruce Lipton. It says, you can't be in growth and protection at the same time. And that's what we see with too many kids. They're stuck in protection, they're stuck in survival, which means growth modes can't turn on. The last thing I'll leave you with, parents, of how do you know if this is going on with your child? How do you know if this is their story? That's what our scans are for. That's what measuring the nervous system is based on. It's seeing, Are we in fight or flight? Are we in a clear brain-body communication state, or are we stuck? Are we struggling? Are we living in fight or flight all the time? That is what we do with Thrive, right? That is the entire purpose of our care, is one, finding out if that's the case, right? Deep dive into the case history, deep dive into their nervous system through the insight scans and seeing, are we at the right place? And if we're not, what does it look like to get out of that, right? What does that proper care plan, proper neurologically focused adjustments look like to unwind that stress, to build back that neurological foundation so that if they're needed, these other interventions, these other tiers of health can be way more effective. And that's what's on the side here, right? PX Docs Care, that is what our practice Thrive is a huge part of. And that's where, say you're listening to this video, not from Western PA here, that's where I would encourage you to turn. If you're not nearby us, look to that directory, try to find a PX Docs neurologically focused office near you, because that is going to be how you get your kid on the right path. You get them out of this stuck and struggling mode so that their future trajectory can look way different. I hope that helps, moms and dads. Please reach out to Thrive if you want to get those scans set up with your family. If you want to dig into this more, ask any questions about what does that process look like, how does my kid get adjusted, we're here to help, and we can't wait to meet you soon and help your family thrive.